Well, I think it's everybody who want to connect is here, so we can start.
Okay, cool. Great. Well, unfortunately, we aren't quite meeting in person yet, or we'd be sitting around having a beer. But you know, we're doing the best we can, and we're close. So, well, thank you so much for inviting me, Alexi. I'm super excited. I think this is a great fit for this crowd, and I'm super excited to hear your questions and explain what we've been working on for the last few years. So we've been working on a product called EmotiBit that you can see here, and this kind of sits in a broader context of what I think about the future of biometrics and potentially even augmented cognition. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about EmotiBit and some of the things that I think that led me and my company to create it, and then also spend a little bit of time waxing philosophical and broadening the discussion into a more speculative, futuristic thinking. So a little background on myself. My name is Sean Montgomery, and I got my PhD in neuroscience in 2008, studying high density electrophysiological recording in rodents running around on a maze, solving memory problems and looking at how their coalitions of neurons would communicate with each other to serve encoding and retrieval functions. And as I was finishing my PhD in neuroscience, I started to think more about getting into technology as a way to kind of bridge some of my different interests, and then also to seek a faster pace, the pace of technology innovation, compared to the pace of particularly integrative. Did you lose me? Am I back?
Sorry, yeah, continue. Let's continue.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I wear a number of different hats in my life. I am creating EmotiBit. I also run a consulting company called Connected Future Labs, where we do some similar things to EmotiBit. Often involves a lot of sensors, integrating that data, making sense out of it. And then I also teach at a number of different places. I was telling Alexi, I was in New York City for the last 20 years. So I've taught at NYU and Hunter, as well as a number of places around the region. And recently I moved to Reno, Nevada, which is kind of in northern Nevada near Tahoe, and has a great university, the University of Nevada, Reno. So now I'm engaging with the crowd there. Oops, let me click over here. Great. So a little background, a little internal context on me. I've been, ever since getting my PhD in neuroscience, I've been thinking about how to use technology to change the way we are aware of ourselves, and then also how we can communicate and express ourselves to one another. And so that initially started as I was finishing my PhD, creating a host of devices, a truth bracelet, and this measures electrodermal activity for those of you who are familiar with it. I've actually got the truth bracelet on right now. And electrodermal activity, we'll go into it in a little more detail, but it's really dialed into the arousal systems on your body. So when this is all blue, that means I'm really calm, and you're seeing it light up a little bit red right now as I'm talking, because speaking publicly gets me all riled up, and I start reacting to every little thing. And so this is the reason when you go into a job interview or you have a, you're on a date or something, your hands get sweaty because this is actually driven by a sweat gland in your hand. It's measuring the resistance of your skin, and that's picking up these micro pulses of sweat that are reacting through your sympathetic nervous system to your anxiety or your excitement about what's going on. So, for example, if I calm myself down, give me just a second here. It's a little tricky. There we go. So if I smack myself, there's a little delay, and then you can see I got all the way up to H level truth there. And that's just my body's way of reacting to that and being like, hey, what the heck, man, what's going on? Then I also created a shirt that detects my heartbeat and lights up every time my heart pumps blood through my body. And then also made a hat I called the thinking cap. And that lights up depending on different combinations of alpha, beta, gamma waves traveling through my cerebral cortex. And so this was kind of the entry point for me into thinking beyond just the brain and thinking more broadly, holistically about the signals that are coming not only directly from the central nervous system, but also those that are coming indirectly from the central nervous system through the peripheral nervous system. Those signals which are preparing the body for action. So the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system. That increases your heart rate, makes your galvanic skin response spike. And then your parasympathetic nervous system is the system that slows you down for rest and digest. And so then after finishing my PhD in neuroscience, did a few things and then started Connected Future Labs, which is my current consulting company. And we've done a number of things in the space, including doing biometrics in automotive, worked with a startup called Control Labs, looking at high density EMG, electromyograph activity from your arm to recreate all of this in a virtual space. So measuring how your neurons are firing and your muscles are contracting using electrical measurements on your arm, and then recreating how that translates into movements of your fingers. And then most recently, working on a project called Galia, being created by OpenBCI in concert with Valve Corporation, who's they make video games among other things, and that's creating kind of the VR adjunct for sensing signals from the body, figuring out how to close the loop between EEG and some of the other signals I'm going to talk about, PPG, EDA, and use that information in a kind of closed loop context with VR and potentially mixed reality content as well. So since finishing my PhD in neuroscience, I've been waiting for somebody to create EmotiBit. So for over a decade, I was like, gee whiz, what I really want here is for somebody to make the hardware that's going to give me really high quality data and make it open, give me access to the raw data, because I have my own ideas about what I want to do with the data, and I don't want to have to deal with a bunch of preconditioning or garbage algorithms that are pre-processing my data. And I'd like the source code to be a little bit open, at least to kind of get access to tweaking different things if I want to, and a host of other criteria that I was waiting for. And I waited and waited and waited. And finally in 2018, I realized, oh, wait a minute, actually, I get it. Connected Future Labs needs to make this thing because it's a weird constellation of skills. spanning from hardware to firmware to software, data science, machine learning, and then also understanding the scientific context in which you might want to start asking questions about the body, the biology, and just generally having an understanding of how to go about scientifically investigating some of these questions. And what I waited and waited and waited, and then finally in 2018 we decided to make EmotiBit because we wanted to tick all these boxes, and we wanted to make it really accessible for people to do whatever they wanted to do with the signals from the body and start to become part of the conversation about signals from the body and what you can do with them, and how that may play an increasing role in our lives. So some of the core principles that went into the creation of EmotiBit, I wanted it to be wearable and easy to wear. So you just strap it on and data starts streaming right away. And one of the pieces of the puzzle for that meant I wanted it to be to be able to put it sense signals from a single location on the body, to make it easy to use and easy to strap on. And that inherently limited us away from certain signals, including EEG, for example, where you're going to need multiple locations to have a reference and a signal electrode. ECG to a large extent, because again, you need different locations on the body. And then, some of the other principles that came into it, we wanted basically any signal we thought was going to be giving us value in terms of understanding the physiological and psycho-emotional state of the wearer, and the physical state of the wearer as well. And then as a scientist and as somebody who both a biological scientist, but also as a data scientist, I wanted to create something that was transparent, where anyone had access to know what the circuitry was doing to the signals, and then everything downstream from that, the firmware, the software, what it's doing, how it's manipulating the signals. And so I can, and so anybody can then understand how to interpret those signals, or how those signals may or may not be interpretable in that configuration. And then wanted to give users full 100% access and ownership of their own data. That's one of the main limitations of the more affordable consumer grade devices, is that there's often very limited access to the raw data. In contrast, the largest corporations in the history of the world often have full access to your data. It's the user who is really given the impoverished access commonly. And then as an artist, I'm not going to talk a ton about my work as an installation and interactive artist, but I wanted to give people a lot of flexibility in what they can do with those signals. So being able to, if you want to stream them live over the internet to create some crazy interactive installation in another country, which is something we did this last summer with ArtaHack, that's possible. If you want to light up your truth, that's possible. If you want to control a solenoid and feed your cat, go for it. So create as much flexibility in terms of what you can do as is reasonably possible. And then finally, we wanted to make it affordable. A barrier to entry of a lot of the research grade products, which have some, but not all of the features I'm talking about, is that they can be very expensive. I mean, they're commonly thousands of dollars, or or many hundreds of dollars per sensor. And then on, they go up into the 10,000 plus category, depending on what you want. And so, that's just not accessible to the average person. So part of our goal is to continue driving down the price, and because I think the more people that are involved in this conversation, the more meaningful the conversation is going to end up being, and the better the future is going to be, the results. So I think this brings kind of an interesting nexus of folks who might be interested in these types of signals. Researchers in affective computing, in psychology, neuroscience, and computer science. There's a broad range of disciplines in research, in academic, but also in industry. Some of our beta users come from Apple and Nike, and thinking about what types of questions are askable with biometric sensing. And then also, kind of broadening that out, including artists and DIYers. I think there's an important piece of the puzzle. There's an important contribution of voice in the art and DIY space to ask and understand what's possible, why we want to do this, why we want to look in this direction. Personal health, I think, is a huge one, and I think that might be something that that y'all might resonate with you. But asking questions about your own body. This is a shirt I made a few years ago. I don't know if you can see it very well, but this is kind of my philosophy on personal health, is that yes, I am a sample size of one, but I'm also a population size of one. And so everything I learn about myself may be relevant in a deep and meaningful way. And then finally, education, thinking about bringing this into contexts where at younger ages, and having people thinking about the transdisciplinary nature of biometric sensing, ranging from biology and chemistry to computer science and data science to health and ethics, and a host of other topics. A number of these, so since I think this crowd might be particularly interested, I would normally kind of gloss over this, but I'll dig in just a little bit. I recently published a paper with some of my collaborators at MIT on really diving into this topic and thinking in a futuristic way about brain-computer interfaces broadly, under which I consider EmotiBit a brain-computer interface, and thinking about open source principles and how that might change the way the future unfolds, to the degree that we incorporate those and increase the conversations. And this is a figure that we have in the paper, and I just wanted to call it out because I thought it might resonate with y'all. But this is just one example of why we need raw data and why we need open source principles to be a part of the conversation. So this is a pretty detailed figure, so I'm just going to walk into it a little bit. But this is showing the derivation of heart rate variability. Some of y'all may be familiar with heart rate variability, but basically there's the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system that both innervate your heart. The sympathetic increases your heart rate, and the parasympathetic decreases your heart rate as they become more active. And there's this kind of balance between the two systems. And so because of the biomechanics of the receptors that are involved in those two systems, sympathetic being adrenaline, and parasympathetic being acetylcholine and some other things, but principally acetylcholine. Adrenaline acts only at slow receptors called metabotropic receptors, whereas acetylcholine acts at slow receptors and fast receptors, metabotropic and ionotropic, nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. And so what that means is people have figured out that you can look at the speed of changes in the heart rate and understand the relative balance of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system engagement of your heart. And so that's what's being shown here. So this is how your heart rate is changing over time. So this is kind of your interbeat interval and how that's changing over time. And then this is taking the Fourier transform of that, or looking at the frequency of changes of your heart rate. And what you can see is there's this high frequency peak, and then there's this, and that's driven by the fast nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. And then there's this low frequency peak. And that's actually a combination of the nicotinic, or sorry, the metabotropic acetylcholine receptors and the adrenaline receptors. And so you can take a ratio of that and kind of understand the relative balance of these, this opponent process system. And so what's being shown here is when you tilt somebody, so this is somebody just laying on a bed, and then if you tilt them, this is known to cause a sympathetic response. Your heart rate starts going faster, and this is driven by adrenaline. And you can see a big change in the way the heart is beating, the way the interbeat intervals are changing. Here they're really fast and spiky, and then here you see this dominance of slow stuff. And then in the Fourier domain, you can see this in the low frequency peak. Now, why do I go into all that detail? Well, one of the things that's really common in a wrist-worn consumer grade heart rate sensor is that there's a lot of missing data. It's tricky, especially when you're running and things like that, to be getting all the data without a bunch of movement artifacts and things coming in. And so you end up with these gaps in data. And so your choices there are to say, sorry, I can't get data right now. And you end up saying that a lot in the times people care about the most. Or you can interpolate, and you can kind of smooth things out a little bit. Interestingly, if you took this and you just started removing some data points and interpolating them and smoothing this a little bit, what you would end up with is something that looks a lot more like this. And so what that means is that the preconditioning that's going on in some of these heart rate measurements is actually making it very difficult to go to the next step and do heart rate variability and derive this sympathetic parasympathetic balance. So that's one example of why it matters, why raw data matters, why open source matters, because if you have this preconditioning that's distorting your results, you can't know entirely whether the thing you're seeing is a result of that. Maybe you just have noisier data when you're doing in one condition versus another, and so it's smoothing it out. Alternatively, you might see no difference where there actually is a difference because of that smoothing out situation. And what's worse still is that if your software is changing on the firmware with a device firmware update, on the phone, even in the cloud, potentially, if updates are happening to your preconditioning at any one of those stages, those could be altering your results, and you may not know when those updates are taking place. So you could be halfway through a study and then have all your results changed. So these are some of the important things that I think, where open source principles and raw data principles have a big part to play. But also if you have access to the raw data, then you have the ability to drive some of these algorithms, right? You have the ability to come up with new ways of interpolating or smoothing that aren't doing some of these things. And you can contribute that back to the conversation. And likewise, one of the hot topics in the last couple of years is correcting the missing data using data from an IMU, like an accelerometer or a gyroscope, and using taking the combination of those two sensors to correct the data. And that's another piece where, that's a fast adapting area of science. And so being kind of at the leading edge of that, or at least knowing where you are in the leading edge of that, can be important. So that was kind of a deep dive into why I think those raw data and open source principles are important. So now the EmotiBit. EmotiBit is, let me actually pull it up here. Let's see here. Can you guys see this window? Yes, I'll just assume you can. Can you see this window, Alexi?
Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome.
Slide.
Cool. So this is EmotiBit. I've got it on my finger right now, but you could also put it on your arm or your leg. I'll talk about some of the beta partners that we've had that have put it on different parts of their body. Our alpha partner in the University of Chicoutimi actually designed this 3D printed case so they could study it on snowboarders, and on and on. So what's coming off of here? Well, like I said, everything we could think of to measure from a single location of the body within bounds of practicality. So you'll see the PPG data up here. This is probably, you're familiar with this. Fitbit, Apple Watch have PPG. This is a 3 wavelength PPG, so it gives you red, infrared, and green. They have different benefits. Green is a little less sensitive to external light. Red and infrared can be used to drive oxygen saturation. So it's an example of a place where 2 signals that look rather similar when you look at them with your eyes, actually by doing some math, you get new information. It's a multiplier. And then this signal down here is EDA, and that's actually measuring the same thing as the truth wristband. So you'll see it spiking as I'm talking, just because talking publicly makes me excited. But you may see, let me see if I can get the light just right here. You may see if I smack myself, you'll see the little delay, and then you see both the truth wristband and you see the EDA signal going up in on the EmotiBit oscilloscope. And then we've got a 9-axis IMU. So it's a 3-axis accelerometer, 3-axis gyroscope, 3-axis magnetometer. Magnetometer is telling you kind of your orientation relative to the magnetic pole of the Earth. And then we've got some different measurements of temperature. This one is one of our beta units, and has several different temperature and humidity sensors, including a thermopile, and that's actually measuring the infrared energy coming off your body as heat. And so that's giving you a medical grade measurement that's less susceptible to environmental fluctuations. So those are some of the signals, and then you can start and stop a recording. the data is recorded locally onto an SD card that's packed right here. And then you can also add timestamp notes. So like right now, I'll say NYQS, and then when I log that note, it's actually being sent to the device and stored there with a timestamp. So you have that timestamp, whatever you want to be marking in the data is possible from there. And then we have a number of different output options. The one that we have enabled right now is something called OSC, but we just unlocked our second stretch goal as a part of our Kickstarter campaign. So we're going to unlock some of these other output options as well to increase the flexibility. So that's kind of the overview. And then this is a little more nitty-gritty details into the hardware. This is basically what I just went through. But you can see on the bottom of EmotiBit, the EDA has these silver chloride snaps, so you can pop those in. You could also attach your own kind of lead system off of those if you wanted to run the EDA somewhere different than you're doing PPG. And then you've got your PPG and your temperature sensor. And this is, the whole system is actually made to work with the entire Adafruit Feather ecosystem. So this is EmotiBit, which is technically a Adafruit Feather wing. And then this is an Adafruit Feather. There are a bunch of different devices. We've been developing for the Wi-Fi M0, but there's also ones that use ESP, so you have a little more horsepower. And then there are different ones. You can get ones that are Bluetooth, and you can get ones that are LoRa and 4G. You can, and then there's this whole ecosystem of wings that you can put on top of it as well. So here's like an 8-segment LED display. You can get LED grids, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But the idea is you can just take these, stack it together, stick in a battery, and you're immediately getting signals from your body. Oops, that's the wrong click. Well, anyway, we can go to the next slide. So these are some of the projects so far that have been using EmotiBit, projects ranging from bring it into a classroom at Duke to our collaborators at the University of Chicoutimi in Canada, studying snowboarders, doing risk-taking behaviors on a half pipe. They're the ones who came up with, the Paquette Lab came up with the idea for the case so that the snowboarder could put the EmotiBit on their calf, but and have it be protected during a snowboarding activity. And then there's a maker project that put a LED grid, a CharliePlex grid, onto the Adafruit Feather and have it light up your heartbeat. Every time your heart beats, it lights up. And then there's some art examples, etc. If anybody's interested, this Hackaday project details kind of the nuts and bolts of the code. So you can see it's just like a one-line change of code. If you want to start, instead of displaying a heartbeat here, maybe you want to turn it into a truth bracelet or something. And like I mentioned, we've had an amazing array of EmotiBit partners over the last 3 years, ranging from industry to academia, from scientists to artists to makers. And it's really been an honor and a great learning process to engage with them and figure out where their needs are and also where the hitches are, you know, in terms of what kind of data specificity they need, and everything to what I might consider kind of boring, but really important network administration issues. So we're live on Kickstarter right now. For another 9 days, you can go to Kickstarter. And if you dig this stuff, I would be honored to have your support. We've so far blown through our goal, or over 500% of our goal. And we've gone through 2 of our stretch goals, and I think we're have a good chance of making it to our 3rd, maybe even our 4th, and unlock some of the additional dev that we want to do to really build out the ecosystem. So, I've mentioned a couple of these things already, but just to kind of briefly run through, some of the benefits for research include the open source transparency. 100% data ownership means that approvals, IRB approvals, are easier because you're not worried about a Google or an Apple or even one of the more research-oriented companies having all your participants' data sitting on their servers. And then also low cost and wearable just means you can ask new questions. You can ask different types of questions, more people at once. R+ Science synergy is something that I'm passionate about. I think more voices is important. I think different perspectives is important. I think it creates multipliers, and just having low cost, easy to use, flexible connectivity, and open source really opens up the possibilities there. Makers and education, as I said before, I think more transdisciplinary project-based education starting at earlier ages just is going to increase the sophistication by which we're asking these difficult questions that we need to ask, and we're going to be asking ourselves again and again over the next 10, 20, 100 years. And then personalized health, it's your body. I think you should own the data to your body. I think you shouldn't worry when you're collecting data from your body whether your insurance company is going to hike your rates, or any number of other possibilities, right? So I think that's just something I think is important. And I think you should be able to ask new questions about your body, not only the questions that somebody in a boardroom, that a suit in a boardroom thought about, but like come up with your own question, and really have as much flexibility as you can to do that. And ultimately to unlock your potential. I imagine in the next 100 years, we're going to be using biometric data, signals from your cranium and the rest of your body. It's going to change how we manage our stress, how we learn, how we communicate. My hunch is it's going to be transformative. And so being a part of that conversation now makes sense to me. And then I think there are multipliers. I think when you bring all these things together, they're not individual things. They create multiplicative synergy. So if you take the benefits for art and you take the benefits for science, they don't just affect their own silos, they affect each other. And they potentially make, my hope is that it just opens up that conversation in important ways. I'm going to, be a little speculative and hopefully a little provocative, but I don't know. Maybe this crowd is unprovocable in this area. But I think the future is context. Broadly speaking, I think context is important. The weather, your location, there are lots of contextual variables that are really important to understanding what's meaningful to you. But I think for me, internal context is a really important part of that. And a piece of that puzzle is characterized by this graph. Data is exponentially increasing. There's more data been generated in the last 3 years than in all the rest of humanity. And yet, our ability to process information is probably at best linearly increasing, if at all. And so I term that TMI, or too much information. And I think this is one of the places where the next century is going to be really making some strides, is figuring out how to deal with that exponentially increasing data and linear or barely increasing brain function or raw brain CPU speed. And one way I think about it is using biometrics to understand internal context and then use that information to deliver actionable insight, to create to understand the context and then do things with it. And so a lot of people think about this, and probably a lot of people here think about this in terms of using a complex constellation of signals that you can pick up from the body and using those to create signatures. So if you'll see here that some of the signals you're picking up look very similar between two different behaviors, engagement versus anxiety, or cognitive states, engagement and anxiety. But others are very different. And as you start layering on more and more of these cognitive states and these signals, you need some kind of machine learning or other digestion to create a mapping onto your, to understand, take your biometric data, look at the signature of that biometric data, and turn it into something that we have some insight into, like an emotional state. And as we get more sophisticated, both in terms of our sensing and also in terms of our algorithms, we can start to get more and more refined in isolating more and more cognitive and emotional states. Currently, state of the art is something between like 6 and 8, 6 and 10 cognitive emotional states can be reasonably separated from each other, let's say 75, 80% of the time, depends on context, a lot of variables, depends on your algorithms. But there's a lot of challenges with that process. We'll talk about some of those. And I think what we need to move to is a what you need when you need it type of arrangement. So we need something to get us away from the fire hose approach to dealing with data, and use some combination of context and artificial intelligence to create insight. So when you're in a state that is ready to learn, is ready to engage, that you're getting the information that's relevant and useful to you at that moment. And you know, when you're overwhelmed or when you need a break, you're not just getting pelted constantly with information that you can't do anything with, or or worse, it just makes you angry. Now, there's a lot of challenges in this space. Everything from the sensing itself, as I mentioned, the data transparency, the science of systematic data collection, labeling, the overfitting and individual differences on kind of technical side, and then getting more into the philosophical side of things, getting into big data, black box algorithms, creating UX designs that you can make use of this stuff, and ultimately having trust and in who has access to that data, what they're doing with it, and when we start talking about having feedback loops between your biometric data and your the things that are being presented to your percept, whether that's a video game or your Facebook feed or whatever it is, there's a real opportunity there, and there's some questions that come up about who's in charge of that algorithm, and is it fair? Is it being manipulated? Do you trust the actors involved? Do you have transparency to even to give yourself that trust? And these are some of the things we mention in this paper in kind of a speculative way. But I think there is no getting around it. You know, regardless of what these challenges are and what the potential risks are for individuals and for society as a whole, there's just too much positive, too much driving us in this direction for more insight and more data-driven insight. And that data is going to come in part from biometrics, and an important part of that data, because it's going to improve health. It's going to make it so that when you are, you know, they recently had a study come out where they were, a group was able to use fMRI, which is a little more engaged than an EmotiBit, obviously. They used fMRI to predict psychotic breaks. So that's amazing, because psychotic breaks are devastating to people's lives. And you know, what happens if you get it wrong? You know, what happens if you start quarantining people who you think are going to have a psychotic break and they're not? Or you just start making judgments like you should throw people into padded rooms. You know, there's some real challenges there. But at the end of the day, we have to get it right, and we're going to be pushed forward, because if for no other reason, if you can be smarter than the next guy in your, you know, when you're running trades on Wall Street, you're gonna do it, right? It's going to happen. So that's all I plan to talk about today. But thank you very much. I would be happy to answer any questions. And if you dig EmotiBit, if that's your jam, I would love your support. And if you know anybody who might dig EmotiBit, I would love for you to pass it along to them. We have 9 days left, and we're trying hard to build out this ecosystem as robustly as we can to really unlock some of the potential here.
Well, thank you. I really have this context you talk about. What is like next emotional mapping do you think is possible, or to be precise, more like there's a lot more than emotions in our organism, right? What do you think is next, or is it? Do you need some particular research to dig into mapping of your parameter, your board collecting to the research data? Because this is maybe like overwhelming task, right? A lot of people measuring it with commercial devices, and then they publish a lot of works, papers, and you just cannot read it, right? Physically.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the EmotiBit is really tapped into here. I'll just pop up my my signal so you can see how excited I am as I'm responding here. But the EmotiBit is really tapped into the parasympathetic sympathetic nervous system axis. And so these are historically, i.e. throughout the course of humanity and more, right? Mammalian, I'm not even sure, I'm not an expert on reptilian and bird behavior, but I assume they have some version of these systems as well. These systems are geared toward fight or flight and rest and digest. So anything that is engaging you to be more acutely focused, to be more ready to fight or run away, those or engage with a mate, you know, kind of like really core things. Those systems are going to be highly reflecting those cognitive and emotional changes. What is going to be harder with EmotiBit data, and where you're going to need to go really into a central nervous system type measurement, is when you start talking about like distinguishing when you're imagining a red fire truck versus a pink elephant, right? If these things have a fight or flight or a rest and digest type implication, maybe you can pick up those differences, but it's going to be difficult to really get at these hypercognitive nuances in what you're imagining, for example. The number of things that you can pick up is a little bit of a, my hunch is what we're picking up right now is a fraction of what we will be able to pick up in the next decade, and the acuity with which we'll be able to do it. It's 6 to 8 or whatever it is right now. Now, there are challenges associated with actually doing that, and a lot of those challenges, if you have good data, which we're trying to solve that like first step of the staircase. If you have good data, the next challenge and some of the challenges that follow have to do with your machine learning and overfitting. How are you going to analyze that data? And currently, the best thing we have are sort of traditional machine learning and more recently deep learning. And the main thing about those tools is that they tend to overfit data. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you look at your cognitive states while you're watching a movie or watching one of two different movies, a happy movie and a sad movie, you're going to get really good at understanding happy and sad movies. But if you then try to transfer that to your workplace or walking down the street in New York City and try to understand happy and sad as you're walking down the street in New York City, there may be challenges. And so that's what I think is going to get better over time, is our algorithms are going to get better at not overfitting the data. How to dive into this stuff? I think everyone's going to answer that question themselves a little differently. Our hope over time is to be building up an open source ecosystem that, same as the way we're taking the hardware and trying to make that step a solved problem. So you don't have to use somebody else's hardware that's all locked down. And you don't have to create your own hardware, which is, I can attest, a pain in the butt. So same there, start building the next steps. We've already passed our stretch goal to build some more derivative biometrics, heart rate, electrodermal response, magnitude and frequency and things like that. But then it's on down the line, some data science tools. We want to start building some of the core stepping stones there, or pulling them in. We don't have to build them ourselves, or having the community contribute them. And then same goes for machine learning, starting to build some of the building blocks for people to start going up that staircase.
Thank you for the answer. James Dow asking, have you had turned down deals partnership to maintain this ethos? Projects open source.
Turn down deals and partnerships?
Yeah, to maintain the spirit, the open source part. Because yeah. I saw it, the Apple logos and all the big guys.
Yeah, we definitely, we've talked to some people about even as large a deal as like acquisitions and things like that. I think the important, and we've also made a lot of partnerships, a lot of smaller partnerships, beta partnerships and alpha partnerships over the years. And so the important thing for me is to maintain some of the principles I outlined. because I think that's what's missing. You know, if we're just going to be another Fitbit, you can just get a Fitbit. I mean, Google bought them for what, $4 billion or something. Like, they've got more capital than we do. So if we're not adding anything in terms of transparency, then I think they're going to win. But you know, I think also being open source self-selects who is interested in this stuff. You know, VC, I think, not always, but many times looks at open source and says, well, that's nice, but you're just going to get copied if you get popular. So I'm not going to make 10x in 3 years. So have a nice day. You know, we're committed to those principles. So it's not something we plan to compromise on.
Great to hear this. Really heartwarming. Um, David and Goliath stuff. Okay, so VJ asking, is there an indirect or indirect way to measure neurotransmitters like oxytocin?
Oxytocin, you know, I'm not a deep expert in oxytocin and the pathways it impacts. My strong hunch is that it would be possible to kind of trace it back from peripheral nervous system signals. Oxytocin has big impacts on the periphery. You know, one of the things, as a recent father of 2 kids, oxytocin is very involved in the process of birth, and it has very profound effects on the periphery. So there's my hunch is that you can pick up, you can kind of, it would be possible, if it hasn't already been done in the research literature, it would be possible to take a constellation of these signals and take it back to oxytocin. Now, if it hasn't been done in a research lab, that is a challenging task, right? Because you actually need to draw blood or measure oxytocin in some other way to make that correlation. So that's but presumably you're actually, Vijay, what you're actually interested in is not necessarily the oxytocin itself, but what we know about oxytocin and the effects it has on the mind and body. So it may be possible to kind of trace those back, even in the absence of drawing blood and measuring oxytocin. If somebody hasn't done it, they very well may have.
Excellent. Yes, I'll look into it. I'm just I'm looking into the sex stack, like, you know, then the project like this has phenomenal application there. It's just we don't know the power, you know, the signal. So I'm definitely, sooner or later, I'm going to try. So is it easily available? Like, can we order one online?
Yeah, if you go to our Kickstarter, you can support today. So there's 2 tiers in terms of timeline. So we have a limited number of beta units that we've created in small batches over the last couple of years. And so we have a few left of those, like maybe 5 or 10. And those will ship as soon as our Kickstarter campaign ends and we come up for air. So like end of May, June timeframe. And then we're going to do a larger batch, larger manufacturing run that brings down the price somewhat. And those will ship in the winter of 2022.
Definitely, I look forward to. I'm going to support this. Now, just to follow up, you said the where can this signal can be picked up? Peripheral. What area was that?
So you know, we actually have a whole blog post. If you go to EmotiBit.com, you can scroll down to our blog and you'll find a blog post about where you can put it, different parts of your body, and the pros and cons. Every place has pros and cons, and it really depends on the question you want to ask. Your finger is a great place, so you can put it there, but our collaborators in Canada put it on snowboarders' calves, and they got great signal. there, which isn't a place I even thought of putting it. I just thought people should be able to put it wherever they want. That's why we made it easy. I should mention also that built into the design of EmotiBit is we create these little slots in the board, so you can put it, this way or that way, and just put, put strap material through here. We use Velstretch oftentimes, but you can use whatever you want. I should also mention about your comment about understanding these things and what's known and what's not known. I agree with you 100%. My tacit assumption here is that the number of things we don't know about these signals that are knowable vastly outweighs the number of things we know. And so, what I'm hopeful is that having more voices and more people engaged in this stuff is that it'll kind of unlock that door, because people will start asking different questions and figure out what's knowable and what's not knowable. As an example, the PPG is, the way it works is it just shines light into your body, and then it looks at how much of that light reflects. And it turns out when your blood is oxygenated, it reflects more red light. When it's deoxygenated, it reflects less red light, and that's why your blood looks red and blue when it's oxygenated, deoxygenated. Well, you know what? Measuring shining light at things and measuring how much light comes back, that's exactly how chemists determine the chemical content of compounds. That's exactly how cosmologists try to understand the beginning of the universe, right? And so my hunch is that there's a lot more information here that's untapped. We've got 3 wavelengths here, which is great. It's state of the art. And there's probably a lot we can learn just by looking in more detail at those things. And there's, somewhere approximating infinite more wavelengths across the spectrum that we could be using and asking questions about as well, potentially in the future.
Great. I know we are over time, but I would like to add 2 comments really quick. So there are 2 areas which, which I see there is a big potential is when the ADHD. These days, adults and children, they equally have this problem. So, this can be used to, give some sort of feedback that how well you are keeping your attention. And the second is the social media marketing. When new product is launched, that aha moment, that cool factor, when they do go for the test, they can give it to the, the first time users and see how they react. So, it's infinite. It's very noble work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay.
Thank you for the questions, guys. There's a couple more. How much data is recorded in a waking day? And is there a community facilitating citizen science and sharing their inside experiments tools on the base of this data?
Yeah, so as far as data goes, since we have an SD card built in, you can get very large SD cards these days. And we are Rockin' and Research and Kit, as an example, ships with, well, we're still working on exactly how big, but the beta kit ships with a 32 gigabyte SD card, and probably the Rockin' and Research and Kit will have the same. And this will store months of data, or at least close to a month worth of data, so a lot. And you can get much bigger SD cards if you want. Wait, what was the second question? I forgot.
The community. I think the good community for you is where I advertised quantified self, people, biohackers, and researchers that cure the diseases that is not actually curable, and also open data community like Kaggle. A good place, but do you think like publish it somewhere else? And how people usually do they retain this data or they share? What's the general attitude?
It's a mix. I have a dream that one day we will kind of coalesce the community around an easy way to share data if they want to, and also share more about methods and be able to kind of socially engage around data and methods. So like if somebody likes your methods and likes your data, like maybe we can use a social network type of phenomenon to be able to raise that to the attention of other people who might be able to value from it. And there are some tools out there, some of which we're familiar with, some of which we need to learn more about. But I think that's my dream, is that someday we will have a place. Everyone who cares about this data will know where to look for it, and we can share it, and we can talk about it, and we can learn from each other about the data and the methods.
Oh, I have a stupid question. All this pandemic stuff, and yeah, I used like telemedicine procedures, meetings with doctors a couple times, and like the doctor asked me, hey, can you go and weigh yourself or measure your blood pressure? And this device, is it possible to use it, I don't know, to inform the doctor more about my body numbers? Because actually all this telemedicine stuff, it's like, I don't know, is it efficient at all without tools? And actually later I figured out that my blood pressure device isn't calibrated properly. So yeah, as I understand, your device doesn't measure blood pressure. Yeah, for it needs...
No, so there are surrogates of blood pressure that are embodied in the PPG, but they do require some calibration. So the size of the pulse, the blood volume pulse, can co-vary with blood pressure, but also has some other sources of noise and things like that that you want to make sure you're ruling out, which is hard in daily life. There is something called pulse transit time, where if you have two EmotiBits, we've actually created the timing of the EmotiBits to be quite accurate, down into the sub 10 millisecond level is our target. And so what you can do is with two EmotiBits, you can put them on two places on your body. And then you can actually measure how quickly the blood travels between those two places. That's called pulse transit time. And that co-varies with blood pressure in a very meaningful way.
This information sounds really attractive, at least for people of my age. You know, I'm starting having all these aging health problems. Yeah, and okay, two devices.
Now, will your doctor know what to do with it? That's another question. So you
yes,
may have
absolutely.
to help him along.
Absolutely. Yeah. Usually doctors, they are like really far away from all this technical nuts and bolts, and they are not interested to move away from their own instructions and what they were taught in their schools or somewhere they taught. Yeah. But as an engineer, yeah, I meant like, yeah, and it's really strange for me to hear like, oh, maybe we should share our data with other people. I'm not sure about it, but I would like to have my own data for myself. Like,
well, I'm actually sharing my data. I'm sharing a lot. I'm sharing. There's a service called 23andMe, and service from Dante Labs. and they both can be used. Like I did two sequencing, and I did a lot of questionnaires, and then can be used on sequencing.com. So sequencing.com is actually like uh, a gamifying experience to sharing your data. So they reward you for the
We're talking
for,
about DNA testing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, DNA test, and all the questions that actually do the functional genomics, like if you answer question in connection with the DNA research, it is actually move the application of such and such gene and such condition to genes back. So it's both genetics and functions.
Functions. Oh, okay.
All right. Can we go to the last question? Thomas, can you elaborate on, if you're here, can you elaborate on sustainability model for the project, what it is in your view?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for a presentation. I really enjoy seeing these principles embodied in hardware. It's a great step forward. So my question really is there, do you have a business model that will be sustainable in the future? And have you made some considerations in that direction, or have you arrived at a potentially sustainable business model? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's our goal, is this isn't just a hobby. We would like to continue to grow the ecosystem. And so, we've dug deep into pricing. A lot of the sensors we're using are expensive. And especially right now, I don't know how many people are familiar, but the silicon market is just crazy because of COVID, but also there's these crazy silicon wafer factory fires that have blown up prices everywhere, and availability. But we've been working through that. So our goal is to make pricing, to make this, to kind of find the sweet spot of pricing where we make it accessible, where people can, it's relatively affordable compared to thousands of dollars for research grade stuff. But you still get the research grade signals from EmotiBit, and then on the other hand, be able to, with enough scale, our hope is that by making it accessible, by kind of tapping into some things that are missing, the openness and flexibility and all that, that enough people will be interested that volumes will kind of give us the resources we need to start building out this ecosystem. And so, yeah, our goal is to be sustainable, is to have a company that grows over time, and continues to kind of find more people and who start thinking about the future of biometric sensing and want to be involved.
Well, thank you very much. It's a good point to end our conversation today. Please contact Sean directly via website with crowdsourcing campaign. Also invite him to do a presentation in your communities as I did. I also would like to help you with if you need scientist information, particular like scientist group. I'm developing database to search and to be able to contact them. So please don't hesitate, and let's push this effort further toward the citizen science, toward the biohacker communities, toward the all kind of of applications and data exchange practices, and let's like fight big guys, right? We're here to change the world, and big guys are not nice. So we'll show them what it is, right? Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Sean. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me, Alexei. Thank you so much, everybody, for your attention and great questions.